Under the quiet glow of the store's lights, Marcus Hale moved slowly down the aisles. To everyone else he was just another worker in plain clothes, wearing an old blue vest with a small plastic name tag. But Marcus was not an ordinary clerk. He was the CEO of the company, a man who normally spent his days in high-rise offices, boardrooms with polished tables, and endless meetings about profits and strategies. He had decided to step away from that world for a while. He wanted to know the truth of what life was like in his stores, not from reports or numbers, but from the real people who kept the doors open and the shelves stocked. It was not the first time Marcus had thought about going undercover, but it was the first time he had acted on it. He had grown tired of hearing second-hand stories about workers' struggles. He wanted to feel the weight of the work himself, to understand the smiles and the frowns that came with long hours. So, he put on a disguise, worn jeans, simple sneakers, and a cap pulled low. No one in this small suburban branch recognized him. To them, he was simply Mark, the new hire who had been asked to shadow cashiers and stockers. On his second day, while learning how to stack items neatly, Marcus noticed the steady hum of the checkout lanes. People came and went with baskets full of groceries, diapers, milk, bread, and weekend snacks. Most customers were in a hurry, moving quickly as if life itself were waiting in the car outside. His eyes drifted from lane to lane, and then they stopped on register 3. That was where he saw her for the first time, Lila Brown. Lila stood behind the counter, scanning items carefully. She was not tall, and her frame looked fragile under the weight of her uniform. But what caught Marcus's eyes were the 2 bright white casts wrapped around her forearms. Both arms, from wrist to elbow, were stiff with plaster. He thought for a moment that maybe she was training, or perhaps this was some unusual medical support. But then he saw how she worked, using her elbows, shifting her weight, balancing the scanner between her wrists, moving slowly but surely to bag items. Her movements were awkward, but there was no hesitation. She had turned her casts into tools, and with every customer, she proved that she was determined to keep working no matter how hard it became. The customers noticed too. Some looked at her with pity, some with impatience. One man muttered about the long line and how slow the cashier was. Lila didn't respond with anger. She just gave a small smile and said softly, "I'm sorry for the wait." Her voice carried warmth, the kind that softened even sharp words. Marcus felt something stir in his chest. He was used to efficiency reports and customer satisfaction numbers, but here was a woman who turned kindness into a shield, protecting herself and others from the roughness of life. Marcus stayed near her lane longer than necessary. He saw her handle difficult situations with calm patience. When a mother came through the line struggling with a crying toddler, Lila leaned gently over the counter, using her elbow to adjust the baby's blanket. The child stopped crying for a moment, distracted by Lila's calm presence. When an elderly lady worried about counting coins correctly, Lila encouraged her kindly, telling her, "Take your time, ma'am. We're not in a hurry." Behind her smile, Marcus noticed the signs of quiet pain. Her eyes flickered sometimes when she lifted a heavy bag, and she would adjust her posture carefully to avoid bumping her casts. Yet she never asked for help. She seemed determined to prove to herself and to others that she could do the job, no matter what. Marcus could not understand why she was working with such injuries. Most people would take time off, rest at home, or recover before returning to work. Why would she be here, pushing through such difficulty? During his break, Marcus overheard 2 other employees whispering near the vending machine. They spoke about Lila. One said, she had that accident at her second job, cleaning offices. Fell down the stairs, broke both arms. The other shook her head. She doesn't have sick leave left, and she can't afford to stay home. Rent, bills, her little boy, she has to keep working. Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. He had expected to find inventory problems or maybe poor customer service during his undercover visit. He thought he would hear small complaints about schedules or stock. But he had not expected this. He had not expected to see someone so broken and yet so strong. That night, Marcus could not sleep easily. The image of Lila behind the counter stayed in his mind. He thought of her balancing grocery bags with casts, of her soft apology to angry customers, of her tired smile that still managed to comfort a crying child. He thought of his own life, the fine meals, the comfortable home, the security of never worrying about rent or medical bills. And then he thought of her, working long shifts with broken arms because she had no other choice. The next morning, Marcus returned to the store, blending in again as the new hire. But now his eyes followed Lila wherever she went. He watched her open her register with careful precision. He noticed the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, refusing to let her injuries define her. When other workers offered to help, she smiled and said she could manage. Her pride was strong, but Marcus could see the truth. Every movement cost her effort, every shift was heavier than the last. As the day went on, Marcus found himself standing in her line just to watch her work. He listened to how she spoke to customers, never once letting her pain become their problem. He saw the respect she showed every single person, even when they did not return it. She was not just scanning groceries. She was carrying her world on her shoulders, the weight of her son's future, the fear of losing her home, and the unending battle to survive in a system that offered her little safety. When his shift ended, Marcus lingered by the break room again. He heard more pieces of her story from the staff. They said she had a 6-year-old boy named Jamal, cared for by her mother while she worked. They said she was always polite, always helpful, but that sometimes she cried quietly in the bathroom when no one was supposed to be watching. Marcus did not know whether to feel anger, sadness, or shame. But he knew one thing: this woman was stronger than anyone in the boardroom he had ever met. Walking out of the store that evening, Marcus realized his undercover project had already changed him. He had thought the greatest problems were numbers, schedules, and sales charts. But the real problem was deeper. It was people like Lila, who carried the weight of broken arms and broken systems with no safety net. As he stepped into the cool night air, Marcus whispered to himself, "This is not right." He knew then that what he had found in that small store was more than a worker with casts. He had found a truth that would break his heart, a truth he could not ignore. And from that night forward, his mission would no longer be about just numbers. It would be about people, especially those like Lila, who gave everything and received so little in return. Marcus came back the next morning with a heavier heart than before. He had barely slept, his mind busy with the picture of Lila working behind that register with both her arms in casts. He had promised himself that he would not get too personal during his undercover time, but something about her pulled him closer. He wanted to know more, not as a boss, not even as a worker, but as a human being trying to understand how she could survive in such conditions. He started his shift quietly, stocking shelves and moving boxes the way any new hire would. But every chance he got, he looked toward Lila's lane. He noticed things that he had missed on the first day. She was always the first one to greet customers with a smile, even when her face looked tired. She used little phrases like "Good morning, how are you today, and I hope you have a nice evening." These words seemed simple, but the way she said them showed real care. Marcus also noticed that she knew many of the customers by name. When a young boy came in with his school bag, she asked, "Did you pass your math test?" When an older gentleman came in for his usual newspaper, she said, "I saved this copy for you. I know you like it." It amazed Marcus how she remembered the smallest details, even while dealing with her own struggles. Customers responded to her warmth. Some smiled back, some paused to chat. For a brief moment in their day, they felt seen. Later, Marcus found himself working in the aisle near the break room. He overheard two employees chatting about Lila. One said, "I don't know how she does it. 2 broken arms and still working full shifts." The other replied, "She has a son, right? Maybe she doesn't have a choice." Their voices lowered as they spoke about her accident. She had been working her second job, cleaning offices late at night, when she slipped on a wet staircase. Both arms hit the metal railing. The doctors told her recovery would take months. She didn't qualify for full benefits because she was part-time at both jobs. The company rules required long waiting times before any payment came through. She couldn't afford to wait. Rent and bills would not wait either. Marcus's chest tightened as he listened. He thought about how many times he had signed documents that mentioned cost reduction and productivity. Those words had seemed so clean in the boardroom. But now, he could see what they looked like in real life. They looked like Lila, a woman standing with 2 casts, still doing her best to serve people because she had no other choice. When he returned to the front of the store, Marcus saw more signs of her struggle. Lila never complained, but her movements showed the truth. When she bent to lift a heavy bag of dog food, her face tightened for a second before she smoothed it over with a smile. When she tried to count change, she leaned awkwardly, using her elbow to steady the coins. She moved slower than the other cashiers, and sometimes the line at her register grew long. Yet she never allowed frustration to show. Instead, she apologized softly and kept going. That afternoon, a moment came that Marcus would never forget. A customer in a hurry grew impatient and raised his voice, saying, "Can't you move any faster? This is ridiculous." The people in line fell silent, some nodding in agreement, others looking embarrassed. Lila looked up at the man, her face calm. She said, "I'm sorry for the delay. Thank you for being patient." She did not defend herself, did not explain her condition, did not argue. She simply responded with grace. The man looked away, ashamed, and the line continued. Marcus felt anger rising inside him. He wanted to step forward and tell everyone who he was. He wanted to shout that this woman was stronger than anyone in the room, that she deserved respect, care, and help. But he held himself back. He was not ready to reveal his identity. He needed to learn more. He needed to understand fully before making any changes. Over the next few days, Marcus gathered small details about her life. He learned that her son, Jamal, was 6 years old. She often mentioned him in passing conversations with coworkers. "Jamal likes drawing cars," she said once. "He wants to be an engineer one day." Another time, she mentioned how excited he was to start first grade. It was clear that everything Lila did was for her child. She endured pain, long hours, and humiliation just so Jamal could have a roof over his head and food on the table. Marcus also discovered how little support she truly had. Her mother helped watch Jamal while she worked, but her mother was elderly and not in the best of health. Lila had already sold her car to keep up with bills. She sometimes walked long distances or took buses late at night to reach her second job. On some nights, she even skipped meals to make sure Jamal had enough to eat. One evening, Marcus saw Lila sitting alone in the break room, her lunch untouched. She was holding a folded piece of paper, a bill stamped in red. She stared at it for a long time, then tucked it into her bag and stood up with her usual smile. Marcus's heart broke quietly. He had never felt so helpless, even though he was a man with great power in his real role. Here, undercover, he was simply a coworker. He could not reveal himself yet, not without ruining the experiment. Still, Marcus started taking notes. In his small notebook, he wrote down everything he observed: the lack of sick leave for part-time employees, the long wait for disability approval, the heavy scheduling that ignored workers' health. He also noted the quiet kindness among staff. A woman named Maria sometimes helped Lila by lifting heavy items when no one was looking. Another worker covered her register once so Lila could take a short rest. These small acts of compassion reminded Marcus that humanity still lived inside the walls of the store. As the days passed, Marcus's respect for Lila only grew. She was not just surviving, she was shining through her struggle. When a customer left a $20 bill behind by mistake, she quickly called them back to return it. When a little girl dropped her candy, Lila bent down slowly, awkwardly with her casts, and handed it back with a gentle smile. She carried herself with pride, even though her circumstances would have broken many others. Marcus knew then that Lila's story was not just about one woman. It was about many workers who lived paycheck to paycheck, who worked through pain and hardship because they had no safety net. She was a symbol of something larger, a system that needed change. He felt a growing responsibility, not only as a boss but as a human being, to do something. That night, as he left the store, Marcus walked under the streetlights with heavy thoughts. He thought of Lila going home, trying to cook with broken arms, trying to help Jamal with his homework, trying to hide her pain from her son. He imagined her lying awake at night, worrying about bills, wondering if tomorrow would be harder than today. For Marcus, the Undercover project was supposed to be about numbers, efficiency, and management. But it had become personal. He no longer saw employees as statistics on a report. He saw them as people with dreams, struggles, and families. And at the center of it all was Lila, the cashier with broken arms, who carried more strength in her heart than anyone Marcus had ever met. He promised himself silently as he walked home, he would not let her story end in silence. He would find a way to help, not just Lila, but all the workers who lived like her. The road ahead would be hard, but Marcus knew he had been given a rare gift, the chance to see the truth with his own eyes. And he would not waste it. Marcus could have walked away. He could have ended his undercover trip with a few notes about stocking issues, about slow registers, about customer complaints. He could have returned to his office tower, handed the report to his managers, and gone back to business as usual. That was what many leaders would have done. But Marcus could not forget the image of Lila struggling through her shift with those broken arms. He could not erase the sound of her calm apology when an angry customer raised his voice. Something inside him would not allow him to treat her as just another case or example. The next morning, Marcus came in earlier than usual. He wanted to watch the store come alive before most customers arrived. He noticed Lila arriving quietly, carrying a small cloth bag over her shoulder. She walked slower than the others, careful not to bump her casts against the door frame. Even at that hour, she smiled at the greeter and said, "Good morning." Marcus followed her with his eyes, and he realized that her strength was not in hiding her pain, but in carrying it without letting it crush her spirit. As the days went on, Marcus decided to look deeper. He began asking quiet questions, not as a CEO, but as a curious coworker. He spoke to employees about sick leave, about light-duty roles, about scheduling. The answers were always the same: policies existed on paper, but they were hard to use in real life. A worker injured on the job had to file piles of paperwork, wait weeks, and often hear back that some form was missing. Light-duty shifts were almost never approved. Most employees who got hurt simply quit because they could not survive without a paycheck. Marcus wrote everything down in his little notebook. Each fact was like a small piece of a puzzle, and the picture it made was troubling. He thought about how many times he had heard phrases like maximizing efficiency or reducing labor costs in meetings. Now he could see the human cost of those decisions. They were not just numbers. They were people like Lila. One evening, Marcus stayed behind after his shift. He saw Lila walking out of the store, holding a cardboard box. At first, he worried she had been fired. But then he saw that the box was filled with her own things: her sweater, her medical paperwork, and some crayon drawings that could only have come from Jamal. She placed the box carefully on the bus bench outside, waiting for a ride. A neighbor in an old van stopped and offered her a lift to the clinic, but she shook her head. She did not have money for gas. She sat quietly, waiting for the bus. That moment shook Marcus deeply. He was a man with wealth, comfort, and authority, yet here was one of his employees sitting on a bus bench with broken arms and unpaid bills. He had the power to change her situation, but he was still undercover. He could not reveal himself yet, not until he understood everything. But he also knew he could not remain silent forever. Over the next week, Marcus tested the system from inside. He went to the HR office under his disguise and asked about light-duty roles. The HR representative looked at him with a blank expression and repeated the usual rules. If you're injured, you have to submit the request. If approved, you may get limited hours, but most of the time we don't have space. Marcus pushed, asking, "How long does it usually take to get approval?" The HR rep shrugged. "Depends. Sometimes weeks. Sometimes months." He asked about short-term disability. The answer was worse. Workers had to go through long forms, doctor's notes, and multiple approvals. Many gave up before they ever received any money. Marcus realized the system was not broken by accident, it was designed to be slow and difficult so fewer people would qualify. Meanwhile, Lila's life grew more complicated. She still worked every shift she was given, but her second job had cut her hours. Her rent was late again. She avoided the cafeteria because she could not afford lunch most days. Once, Marcus saw her sitting in the break room, quietly drinking water while the others ate sandwiches. She told them she wasn't hungry, but Marcus knew better. He had seen her tucking away bills into her bag, trying to hide her worries. Despite everything, she never let her struggles spill out onto others. One afternoon, a child dropped all his toys in her lane. Lila bent carefully, balancing on one knee, and gathered them with her casts. She handed them back to the child with a smile. Another day, a customer left behind their change. Lila called them back immediately, refusing to keep even a penny that was not hers. Marcus admired her honesty and kindness, but he also felt anger rising inside him. Why should someone so decent and hardworking live in such fear? Why should she have to choose between paying rent and buying medicine? These questions stayed with him day and night. One evening, Marcus overheard a short conversation between Lila and another worker. Lila whispered that she had pawned her jewelry to cover rent. She laughed softly, saying it wasn't much anyway, just a little chain. Her co-worker looked sad, but Lila changed the subject quickly, not wanting anyone's pity. That laugh stayed with Marcus. It was not a happy sound, it was the laugh of someone hiding pain. At night, Marcus went home and sat in his small rented apartment. He was supposed to be living simply for the Undercover project, but even then, he had comfort. He had money in the bank, a safe place to sleep, and food on the table. Lila had none of those certainties. He opened his notebook and reread his notes. The words felt heavier now: no sick leave for part-time, long delay for disability, light duty rarely approved, workers forced to quit. Each phrase carried the weight of a real person's suffering. Marcus realized that this was bigger than one woman's struggle. Lila was not alone. There were likely hundreds, maybe thousands of workers in his stores facing the same problems. Some may not have spoken up, but their silence did not mean they were safe. It meant they were afraid. Afraid of losing their jobs, their homes, or their dignity. The more Marcus thought about it, the more determined he became. He could not allow things to continue as they were. If he truly wanted to call himself a leader, he had to do more than sit in meetings and approve reports. He had to take action. But he also knew he needed to be careful. If he revealed himself too soon, managers might cover up problems, employees might stay silent, and the truth would be lost. He needed to see more, hear more, and learn more before taking the next step. So Marcus made a decision. He would continue his undercover role for a little longer, gathering every detail he could. He would push the system from the inside, asking questions, testing policies, and watching how people responded. And when the time came, he would reveal who he truly was, not just to help Lila, but to change the lives of every worker who carried the same burden. That night, as he closed his notebook, Marcus whispered to himself, "You're not alone, Lila. I've seen you. And I won't let this end here." It was the beginning of a promise, one that would soon change everything, not just for one cashier with broken arms, but for an entire company that had forgotten the true value of its people. Marcus had gathered enough proof. His notebook was filled with observations, policies that failed, and human stories that broke his heart. He had come undercover to learn about his company, but now he was carrying something heavier, the truth. The time had come to step forward, but he wanted to do it in a way that preserved dignity for the workers, especially for Lila. He had seen her strength, her patience, and her quiet suffering. He wanted to make sure that when the changes came, they would not feel like charity. They had to feel like respect. Before revealing himself, Marcus decided to prepare the ground. He called a contact from a local health clinic, using his real name this time. He explained that he wanted to provide medical help for the workers in one of his stores. The clinic director agreed to send a nurse once a week to check employees' health and guide them to affordable resources. Marcus also arranged for the company to cover the cost of basic treatment for anyone who needed it. He set this up quietly, without telling the managers, so he could see how the workers would respond when real help was offered. When the nurse arrived at the store's break room with a small table and a box of supplies, the workers were surprised. Some hesitated, unsure if it was free. Others lined up quickly, grateful for a chance to check their blood pressure or ask about old injuries. Lila was one of the last to approach. She stood at a distance, arms folded carefully in her casts, watching others go first. Her pride made her hesitate. Marcus noticed and gently walked over. "Still undercover," he said softly, "they're here to help. Maybe it could make things easier for you." Lila looked at him with cautious eyes, then slowly agreed. The nurse examined her arms and explained that therapy could help her heal faster. The nurse even mentioned special programs that might cover the cost. For the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of hope in Lila's expression. After that, Marcus knew the moment had come. He could no longer stay in disguise. He gathered the store's staff one afternoon, asking everyone to meet in the break room. The employees looked puzzled. Some thought it was another policy meeting. Others expected a new schedule announcement. Marcus stood before them, still wearing the plain blue vest, and then slowly removed his cap. "My name is Marcus Hale," he said, his voice steady. "I am not a new hire. I am the CEO of this company." The room fell silent. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, and whispers spread across the group. Lila froze in her seat, staring at him with disbelief. Some workers looked nervous, wondering if they had said anything they shouldn't. Others looked relieved, hoping their complaints would finally be heard. Marcus continued, "I came here undercover to see what life is really like in our stores. I wanted to understand what you go through every day. And what I have seen has opened my eyes." He paused, glancing at Lila. "I have seen strength, I have seen patience, and I have seen how much you give to this company. But I have also seen pain, unfairness, and struggles that no worker should have to face." He explained how he had witnessed scheduling problems, how he had learned about the broken system of disability claims, and how he had seen people working through injuries just to survive. "This is not the company I want to lead," he said firmly. "And starting today, things will change." Marcus turned to Lila, his voice softer now. "Lila, you have shown me what true courage looks like. You worked with both arms in casts, never once asking for pity, never once letting your pain become someone else's burden. You have carried yourself with dignity even when life was unfair. I want you to know that your story has touched me deeply. Lila's eyes filled with tears, though she tried to blink them away. She whispered, "I didn't want anyone to see me as weak." Marcus shook his head. "Weak? No. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. And because of you, we will make sure no one else has to go through what you did." He then announced specific changes: a new light-duty program that would guarantee work for employees injured on or off the job, immediate approval for short-term disability so workers would not have to wait months, and regular health clinics for staff. He promised fairer scheduling and additional support for single parents. These were not empty promises, they were backed by resources he had already approved. The employees clapped softly at first, then louder as they realized the changes were real. Some even stood up and cheered. But Marcus noticed not everyone was pleased. A few managers in the room looked uncomfortable. They worried about costs, about how the new rules might affect profits. One manager muttered, "This will be too expensive." Marcus heard it and addressed it directly. "Yes, it will cost more," he said, looking the manager in the eye. "But treating people with dignity is never a waste of money. A company that forgets its workers has already failed, no matter how high its profits look." The room grew quiet again, but this time it was with respect. Marcus had spoken with conviction, and the workers could feel his sincerity. After the meeting, Marcus approached Lila privately. He told her the company would cover her medical care fully, including therapy to help her heal. He offered her a role with flexible hours so she could spend more time with her son while recovering. He asked if he could meet Jamal, not as a boss, but as a supporter who wanted to know the boy whose mother had inspired such change. Lila was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not for the help, but for seeing me. For listening." Marcus smiled gently. "It's the least I can do. You showed me what I should have seen long ago." Still, Lila refused the idea of a public charity event. She did not want cameras or staged moments. She only wanted a chance to heal and provide for her son with dignity. Marcus respected that. He arranged private meetings with HR and the clinic so Lila could plan her next steps without unwanted attention. For the first time in weeks, Lila allowed herself to breathe a little easier. She had been carrying the weight of the world alone, but now she knew someone powerful was standing beside her. And Marcus knew this was not the end, it was the beginning of a long road to making the company a place where people like Lila could thrive, not just survive. That evening, as Marcus left the store no longer undercover, he felt both relief and responsibility. Relief that he had revealed the truth, and responsibility to honor the promise he had made to Lila, to the workers, and to himself. He looked back one last time through the glass doors and saw Lila at her register, still serving customers with a gentle smile, her cast still visible but her spirit unshaken. For Marcus, that image was more powerful than any business success he had ever known. It was the reminder of why true leadership begins with compassion. The weeks after Marcus revealed his identity brought a quiet wave of change. For many workers, life still looked the same from the outside, the same shelves to stock, the same registers to run, the same customers to serve. But underneath those routines, something new was growing: hope. It was not loud or dramatic, but it was steady, like the first rays of sunlight after a storm. Lila was at the center of that change. With Marcus's promise, she was no longer forced to fight every battle alone. Her medical care was finally arranged. The company covered her therapy sessions, and a caseworker from the clinic called regularly to check on her progress. At first, Lila found it strange to accept help. She had always been the one to give, never the one to receive. But slowly, she began to allow herself to believe that she deserved better. She deserved healing, rest, and dignity. Her arms healed faster than expected. The casts eventually came off, replaced with braces and exercises. Therapy sessions helped her regain strength in her fingers and wrists. She practiced lifting small weights, opening jars, even writing again with a pen. Each small victory felt like a mountain climbed. And every time she succeeded, she thought of Jamal. She wanted him to see not only her struggle, but her recovery too, proof that hard times could be overcome. At work, things felt different as well. The new light-duty policy gave injured workers options. Instead of being forced to quit or work through pain, they could shift to tasks that matched their ability. One older worker who had hurt his back was assigned to manage inventory lists on a computer instead of lifting boxes. Another young woman recovering from surgery was allowed to handle customer service calls instead of heavy shifts. For the first time, people felt like they were seen as human beings, not just as numbers on a schedule. The store culture also began to shift. Managers received new training to treat workers with fairness and empathy. Scheduling was adjusted so no one was overloaded with back-to-back closing and opening shifts. Regular health clinics continued, giving workers a safe place to ask for help. Even small things, like adding healthier food options in the break room or providing extra chairs near the registers, made a difference. Through all this, Lila continued to work, but now her days looked different. She no longer felt trapped. She could choose shorter shifts that allowed her to attend therapy and spend evenings with Jamal. Her paycheck was steady, and for the first time in months, she was not behind on rent. She even managed to save a little. It was not much, but it was enough to bring peace of mind. Jamal noticed the change too. His mother's smile returned more often. He no longer heard her crying softly at night. He saw her cooking dinner with more energy, helping him with his homework, and even laughing again. To him, the casts had been a symbol of pain, but now her healing became a symbol of strength. He told his friends proudly, "My mom is the strongest person I know." Marcus kept his promise to stay connected. He visited the store regularly, not as a hidden observer but as himself. Workers were nervous at first, but soon they realized he was not there to judge. He ate lunch with them, asked about their families, and listened to their concerns. He carried a notebook still, but now it was filled not just with problems, but with solutions they offered. When he saw Lila again after her casts were removed, he was struck by how much lighter she looked. Her smile had grown steadier, her posture straighter. He asked about her therapy, and she told him proudly that she could hold a pen again and write Jamal's name without pain. Marcus congratulated her and told her she had inspired company-wide reforms. She looked surprised, almost shy, but also deeply moved. "I never thought my struggle could help anyone else," she said. Marcus replied, "Sometimes the strongest voices are not the loudest. Sometimes it's the quiet ones who show us the truth." Beyond the walls of that one store, Marcus began implementing changes across the company. Policies for part-time workers were revised to include proper sick leave and faster disability approvals. Health partnerships were established in multiple cities. Employee feedback sessions were introduced in every region. It was not a perfect system, and there were still challenges, but progress was visible. Workers felt they mattered. For Lila, life was not suddenly free of hardship. Bills still came, groceries still cost money, and raising a child alone was never easy. But now she faced these challenges with more stability and support. She was able to buy Jamal a new set of pencils and notebooks for school without worrying about skipping a bill. She was able to plan for the future, not just survive the present. One Saturday, Marcus accepted Lila's invitation to meet Jamal. They met in a small park near her apartment. Jamal ran up with a big smile, holding a toy car in his hand. He showed Marcus his drawings of cars and explained how he wanted to build them one day. Marcus listened carefully, encouraging him with gentle words. For a moment, he forgot about boardrooms and profits. He was just a man sitting on a park bench, listening to a little boy's dreams. That meeting reminded Marcus why he had started this journey. He had gone undercover to check on business efficiency, but he had found something far more important, the heart of the company. The workers were its true foundation. Without them, shelves would be empty, registers would be silent, and customers would walk away. It was the people like Lila, with their strength and kindness, who kept everything alive. Months later, when Lila finally received her certificate of completion from physical therapy, she celebrated by cooking a simple meal for her family. It was nothing fancy, just rice, vegetables, and a small cake she bought from the bakery. But to her, it was a feast of victory. She looked at Jamal laughing at the table and felt tears in her eyes. For the first time in a long time, the future looked possible again. Marcus, too, carried the lessons forward. In every decision he made for the company, he thought of Lila. He thought of her bent over the register, her quiet apologies, her tired but determined smile. He thought of the night she sat with a red stamped bill in her bag, and the day she finally held her head high again. Those memories became his compass. They reminded him that leadership was not about profit alone, but about people, about making sure no worker was left to suffer in silence. In the end, the story of the undercover boss and the cashier with broken arms was not just about hardship. It was about resilience, compassion, and change. Lila had shown courage beyond measure, and Marcus had chosen to listen. Together, their paths crossed in a way that transformed not only their lives, but the lives of many others who worked quietly, unseen, carrying heavy burdens. And so, as Lila walked out of the store one evening, holding Jamal's small hand in hers, she felt lighter than she had in months. Her arms were healing, her heart was stronger, and her future brighter. Marcus watched from a distance that night, and instead of feeling sorrow, he felt hope. He had seen the worst of the system, but he had also seen the best of humanity. And he promised himself that as long as he led, he would never let those lessons fade. Because sometimes, the most powerful change begins not in the boardroom, but in the quiet courage of a worker who refuses to give up even with broken arms.